Jeffrey Epstein, the Menendez brothers, and the BTK killer were some of the most notorious criminals in U.S. history. Let's take a look on how they were caught.
In 2005, just 3 years after New York Magazine named Jeffrey Epstein an international money man of mystery, allegations that the financier had engaged in sex acts with minors began to surface. Investigators quickly realized that this was not an ordinary crime. Today, we will look at how Epstein continuously evaded accountability for his crimes for over a decade until the moment he was truly caught. Jeffrey Epstein was born on January 20th, 1953 in Brooklyn, New York. Notably good with numbers, Epstein joined the math team at Lafayette High School and briefly studied math and physics at both Cooper Union and NYU, but never received a degree. Instead, by the mid-1970s, he began teaching calculus and physics at the Dalton School, an expensive private school in New York City. And at least once, he showed up at a high school party where his students were drinking. He paid persistent attention to girls in the hallways and in his classroom, which was so disconcerting, some students later recalled it left an impression that lingered for decades. Though he was never formally accused of sexual misconduct, one student felt so uncomfortable with him, they reported his behavior to a school official. Ultimately, he was let go from the staff due to poor performance. Working at the prestigious school had its benefits. According to Vanity Fair, through his students, he also became connected to powerful parents, one of whom was Ace Greenberg, a legendary trader and a senior partner at Bear Stearns, a company that targeted men exactly like Epstein. They didn't need to have the pedigree. They just needed to be PSD, poor, smart, and deeply desirous to get rich quick. In 1976, Epstein was hired as a junior assistant. By 1980, just 4 years after he had gotten into the business, he was made a senior partner. Epstein quickly acquired a bevy of personal clients as well, and by 1981, he left Bear Stearns to open his own wealth management firm called J. Epstein & Co. His business operated slightly differently than the rest of the industry. He refused to take any client who didn't have at least $1 billion in assets, and acted as their financial architect who controlled all investments, tax strategies, and philanthropic endeavors. Epstein charged a flat fee, never taking commissions or percentages, but demanded power of attorney to control his client's entire fortune. By some estimates, even if his annual management fee was 0.5%, one account worth $15 billion would yield him $75 million a year alone. In addition to his clients, Epstein collected friends he wanted to keep close, often men with political power or in the sciences. For example, he built his Santa Fe home after spending time with Nobel Prize-winning physicist Murray Gell-Mann, who was co-chair of the science board at the Santa Fe Institute at the time. Gerald Edelman, another Nobel Prize winner who managed the Neurosciences Institute, said that at one point, Epstein was giving them $20 million a year, likely in exchange to visit and ask scientific and philosophical questions. Most infamously, though, were Epstein's targeted political connections. Some say he worked especially hard to get close to Bill Clinton, but for several decades, Epstein had been romantically linked to Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of British media mogul Robert Maxwell, who had her own townhouse a few blocks away from his in New York. The heiress was known as a socialite, a party girl with friends in all stratospheres, as high as British royalty. Many postulated that despite their connection, their relationship was largely platonic, mainly due to Epstein's dedication to his bachelor lifestyle. But Epstein wasn't just a playboy, and Maxwell a lovesick groupie. Anyone in Epstein's orbit may have been pulled into the enormous gravity of his alleged heinous crimes, which all began to unravel in March 2005, when a 14-year-old girl confessed to her parents that something terrible had happened to her. Those parents went to the police with her story. Their daughter had been molested by Jeffrey Epstein in his Palm Beach mansion. When she was brought in for questioning, she told authorities she had been brought there by 2 other girls. And when those girls were brought in, they pointed to 2 more girls who had done the same thing to them. Detectives soon identified dozens of victims, all female minors who all told a similar story. They arrived in a taxi to Epstein's Palm Beach waterfront estate and were brought through a side door into a kitchen, where they might be offered a snack, before they were shepherded upstairs to the master bedroom where Epstein lied in wait. One of his victims, Courtney Wild, who was only 14 years old when she was assaulted by Epstein, said of his strategy, "Jeffrey preyed on girls who were in a bad way, girls who were basically homeless. He went after girls who he thought no one would listen to, and he was right." The girls, who were mostly between the ages of 13 and 16, were largely brought to Epstein's home by other victims who had been promised large sums of money to recruit new girls for him, essentially creating a massive, cult-like pyramid scheme so he could systematically rape underage girls in his Palm Beach mansion, sometimes as often as 3 times a day. As lawsuits were filed by dozens of victims, Epstein invoked his Fifth Amendment right to remain silent rather than self-incriminate over 200 times during depositions. By the time Epstein's 53-page federal indictment was served, with a laundry list of crimes perpetrated against about 40 teenage girls, in any normal circumstance, he would have been looking at a life sentence in federal prison. But despite confirmed credibility of the accusations and support of investigators, Epstein may have used his power and influence to lessen the outcome of the charges laid against him. In 2007, over a breakfast meeting conducted at the Marriott in West Palm Beach, Epstein's legal team managed to negotiate an unusually generous plea deal with U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, Miami's top prosecutor and the chief federal law enforcement official in the district. At the time, Epstein was represented by Jay Lefkowitz, a former colleague of Acosta's from a prestigious Washington, D.C. law firm some years before. According to Acosta's unprecedented non-prosecution agreement, Epstein pled guilty to 2 counts of soliciting prostitution from a minor. Spencer Cooven, the lawyer who represented the girl in question, said of the outcome, "She was taken advantage of twice, first by Epstein and then by the criminal justice system that labeled a 14-year-old girl as a prostitute." Under Acosta's deal, Epstein was sentenced to serve just 13 months in a Florida county jail. Unlike many convicted sex offenders, Epstein was placed in a private wing of the Palm Beach County Jail instead of a state prison. Rather than being confined to his cell, the sheriff's office gave him release privileges to work in his Lux office in West Palm Beach, giving him the ability to leave the jail 6 days a week for 12 hours a day. Epstein's limousine would often pick him up from the prison as early as 7:15 a.m., and some days he was not dropped off till almost 11 o'clock p.m. At the time, the sheriff department's official policy ruled explicitly that sex offenders did not qualify for work release. Acosta also allowed another unprecedented stipulation that was in direct violation of federal law, as ruled by a federal judge in 2019. The victims would not be informed of the deal. During the time the case was sealed, the extent of Epstein's alleged crimes from 2001 to 2005, including the number of girls he assaulted and any information on co-conspirators, were lost in a legal limbo. Not even the victims were privy to that information. Local authorities had referred Epstein's case to the FBI as well, but with the plea deal, some have criticized that Acosta had also effectively halted their extensive ongoing probe. In fact, Acosta's deal ensured that Epstein and at least 4 accomplices received immunity from all federal criminal charges, with an incredibly flexible clause granting immunity to any potential co-conspirators as well. Many believe this was meant to protect any influential men who might have had sex with underage girls while with Epstein at one of his properties. In 2017, while Acosta was being nominated to be Secretary of Labor under the Trump administration, a position that directly impacted labor laws related to human trafficking. He was questioned about his choices in Epstein's case, to which he said, "At the end of the day, based on the evidence, professionals within a prosecutor's office decided that a plea that guarantees someone goes to jail, that guarantees he register as a sex offender, generally, and guarantees other outcomes, is a good thing." In 2018, the secret, that was absolutely not a secret despite the best efforts of a few powerful men, was out again. Julie K. Brown wrote a scalding investigative expose in the Miami Herald that put forth allegations, once again, that Epstein had molested or sexually abused what they now believe to be about 80 girls between 2001 and 2006. The article put Epstein in the hot seat again, and this time, he couldn't wiggle out of it. Certain his crimes could not be exclusive to his home in Palm Beach. Investigators in New York City now took up the case, and on July 6, 2019, Epstein was arrested. By July 8, 2019, the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office issued federal charges against Epstein for the sexual trafficking of minors. The allegations would also extend to Ghislaine Maxwell as one of Epstein's recruiters. Upon his indictment in early July, Epstein pleaded not guilty to all allegations that he had sexually exploited and abused dozens of minor girls in the early 2000s at his homes in Manhattan and Palm Beach. His trial was slated for June 2020, but what came next was an unexpected twist for Epstein. For years, Epstein had been able to live freely despite the multitude of sexual abuse allegations. But finally, his vast wealth couldn't help him. Epstein offered to put up about $100 million for bail, requesting house arrest, secured by armed guards he would pay for. The judge didn't buy his argument. After being denied bail, Epstein was returned to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan. At 6:30 a.m. on the morning of July 23, 2019, Epstein was found dead in his cell. According to the BBC, the New York medical examiner officially ruled the death a suicide by hanging. Reportedly, Epstein had injuries on his neck from unidentified sources that some believe may have been self-inflicted in relation to suicide, but others have not ruled out assault by another inmate. Many have since criticized the prison for their careless treatment of a man who needed the strictest supervision, in part because of how it impacts his victims. On July 2, 2020, about a year after Epstein's death, Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested on charges related to the sexual trafficking of minors and is currently in prison awaiting trial. The women Epstein tormented still await any form of justice for the sick abuse that was perpetrated unto them. The effects of both that abuse, as well as the continued failure of the legal and criminal justice systems to protect Epstein's victims, have left many of the women deeply traumatized. Jennifer Arauz, who had said Epstein raped her when she was 15, issued a statement offering her perspective. "We have to live with the scars of his actions for the rest of our lives. While he will never face the consequences of the crimes he committed, the pain and trauma he caused so many people. Epstein is gone, but justice must still be served."
Residing in a Southern California suburb was a seemingly close-knit, picturesque family, a happy wife, successful husband, and 2 handsome sons. From the outside looking in, the Menendez family was living a good life filled with opportunity and a promising future. But from the inside, the distance between them was growing wider and wider, which would ultimately lead to a shocking and grisly scene at their Beverly Hills estate. Brothers Lyle and Eric Menendez were born into wealth, living in the shadow of their father, Jose's, success. Jose was an immigrant who came to America to escape Castro's Cuba in 1960 at age 15. Later, he attended Southern Illinois University on a swimming scholarship, but left at 19 to be with his love interest, Kitty. The couple moved to New York, where Jose continued his education, receiving a degree in accounting while also working part-time as a dishwasher. Jose eventually landed a position with RCA in the records division, signing high-earning acts, Jose and Kitty soon introduced two sons into the world, Lyle and Eric, born nearly 3 years apart. The family lived in a $1 million estate in Princeton, New Jersey, where the boys attended Princeton Day School, where they filled their time with soccer and tennis. Jose was a very serious businessman, and as his career in entertainment continued to thrive, he decided to move his family to Los Angeles, where he began working for International Video Entertainment, later known as Life Entertainment. The boys began their way down what would become a troubling path. Eric befriended another teen named Craig Signorelli, the son of a prominent TV industry executive with whom he played tennis. After being taunted by members of a rival high school, both Eric and Craig were beaten up severely in a street fight deriving from the heckling. The two friends remained close and eventually co-wrote a screenplay titled Friends. The plot involved a son murdering his parents for their inheritance. Along the way, the brothers experienced two serious run-ins with the law. The first was a burglary at a home in Calabasas, and the second was a grand theft at a house in Hidden Hills, amounting to over $100,000 in stolen money and jewels between both homes. Jose hired lawyers for both his sons and dealt with the crimes the way he would deal with any prickly business problem. $11,000 in damages was paid and the stolen items and money were returned. To avoid any issues with Lyle attending Princeton, and because Eric was underage, Jose decided that Eric would take the blame. He received probation as well as compulsory counseling. Kitty was referred to Beverly Hills psychologist Dr. Jerome Oziel to work with her son, who continued to work with Eric for some time to come. Eric transferred to Beverly Hills High School while Lyle went back east to study at Princeton University. Aside from these incidents, it seemed that Kitty and Jose just wanted the best for their children, who were given opportunities to acquire the best things in life. But their high expectations were further tarnished when Lyle was caught cheating in Psychology 101 at Princeton University. Despite every effort made by Jose to convince Princeton authorities to reinstate Lyle, he was expelled from the university. The suspension lasted a year. Extremely proud to have a son attend a top Ivy League school, this incident deeply disappointed Jose. To save face, he urged his son to stay in Princeton during the suspension to avoid having to explain the situation to anyone in Los Angeles. A squeaky clean facade was beginning to reveal signs of hidden flaws. Lyle returned to Los Angeles anyway, and was given a job at his father's company. His job performance had him quickly living up to the stereotypical expectations of a rich, spoiled kid who had everything handed to him. By not working very hard, he earned a bad reputation among his colleagues. His undermining work ethic included slacking off, frequently being tardy, leaving early to play tennis, and showing very little interest in his overall duties. Allegedly causing a major rift between Lyle and his father, Jose paid for an abortion for one of Lyle's girlfriends. This caused Lyle to become infuriated about not being allowed to deal with his own problems. He moved out of the main house and into the guest house. After all of these disappointments, reports reveal that there were some indications that Jose had planned to revise his will, growing tired of financing his sons. One day, Kitty received a call from Lyle. He was irate and verbally abusive over the phone. What was expressed is unknown, but the call from the guest house to their main house reportedly took place just a few days before the Menendez's lives would take a turn for the worse. On August 20th, 1989, armed with shotguns and an alibi, Lyle and Eric entered their Beverly Hills mansion den, raised their weapons, and the shots went off. Jose and Kitty were murdered in cold blood by their own sons. In an attempt to stage the grisly scene to appear as though it had been gang-related, the brothers shot both parents in the kneecaps. Police received a 911 call from Eric, whose hysteria and grief during the call seemed so genuine that it left very little room to even consider the brothers had anything to do with it. But the convincing didn't stop there. During questioning, the brothers went on to suggest that the crime could have been mafia-related, and that they were at the movies at the time of the murder, presenting movie tickets to support their alibi. Within days, Lyle would hire bodyguards to protect them, claiming to be afraid that they could be killed by the same people who killed their parents. Furthering the act, the eulogy given by Eric was described as such a strong performance that it was enough to keep the brothers from being questioned for a long while. This led police to investigate Jose's business ties, and while the investigators were on a wild goose chase, the brothers' spending habits became suspicious. They dished out large sums of money on Rolexes, a Porsche for Lyle, and a Jeep Wrangler for Eric. Eric also purchased a $50,000 a year tennis coach and spent $40,000 to put on a rock concert with the promoter that ended up cheating him out of a deal. Lyle also purchased a restaurant in Princeton. In total, the boys spent about $700,000 within 6 months of their parents' death. In March 1990, 7 months after the murder, the Menendez brothers were arrested. The circumstances of how evidence began to be collected against them was rather extraordinary, as well as morally and legally very complicated. The boys were outed by a woman named Judalon Smith, who had been in a relationship with Eric Menendez's therapist, Dr. L. Jerome Oziel, whom Eric was still working with up to this point. The information she provided broke the case wide open, and not only did what she revealed provide hard evidence against the boys, but it left Dr. Oziel's own integrity to be questioned. After breaking off her relationship with Oziel, Smith went to the police to tell them what she had learned during her relationship. She claimed she had been standing outside of Oziel's office when she heard Eric confess the murder to him. She told police a significant amount of information in regards to the murder. She said she knew that the shotguns had been purchased in San Diego and that the boys used fake IDs to buy them. She also knew that Oziel had tapes recollecting his sessions with Eric and Lyle on October 31st and November 2nd, 1989, in which he had heard their confessions. In addition, she knew that he had a tape of their session from December 11th of the same year. In an ironic twist, ultimately, during their trial, Judalon Smith was used as a witness for the defense in an attempt to discredit Dr. Oziel, who was the prosecution's main witness, despite originally attempting to conceal his incriminating tapes to protect the boys. The courtroom also learned that during the time Dr. Oziel had begun working as Eric's therapist, he was already on a 5-year probation for unethical conduct, after creating a verbal contract with a patient who was unable to pay his bill to do over 300 hours of manual labor at Oziel's house as compensation. And by the time of the brothers' trial, Oziel had 2 complaints against him from 2 women, Judalon Smith and Alex Corey, causing his license to practice therapy to be suspended. Smith claimed that Oziel had been manipulative in their relationship, playing games with her mind and giving drugs to her that he was not licensed to prescribe for her. The Attorney General's charge read, "This case involves the respondent, a psychologist, who engaged in sexual, social, and business relationships with 2 patients, while he and the patients had a psychologist-patient relationship. In addition, the respondent disclosed professional competences to one of the patients, furnished controlled substances without proper medical authorization or supervision to both patients, and forged the name of a physician in a letter." Because of the circumstances in which his parents had put him into therapy, Oziel had Eric sign waivers of the usual confidentiality agreement, so Oziel could share what he had learned with Jose and Kitty when necessary. It was not a traditional arrangement, and many doctors would not have agreed to breaking this type of confidentiality, but Jose Menendez was a persistent man who had orchestrated it. Due to this, the defense would later claim that Eric could never feel safe to talk about being psychologically abused or physically molested by his father. Oziel spent 6 long days on the stand, forced to defend his own credibility, as well as testifying against the brothers, leaving some to feel that it was a diversionary tactic for the defense. Dr. Oziel claimed that he'd hid the confession tapes and kept silent about them for fear that the brothers would retaliate against him, saying, "I was of the firm belief that Eric and Lyle were planning to murder me." Oziel recalled the session of Eric's confession, going on to say that Eric was feeling extremely agitated, depressed, and alienated over his parents' death to the point of being suicidal. He told Oziel that he could see the scene of his parents' death and asked the doctor to take a walk because there was something that he wanted to tell him, but he didn't want to tell him in the office. According to Oziel, on a park bench in Beverly Hills, Eric claimed that the plan began after he and his brother had watched a BBC program on television in which the lead character had killed his father. Investigators would later learn that this programming was actually likely to be Billionaire Boys Club, which had aired on television 3 weeks before the murder. The similarities from the movie to the boys' behavior was so striking that they believed this to be the inspiration that Eric was referring to when he said BBC. In short, the film was about a group of Beverly Hills boys who murdered 2 people, one of which is their father. As further compelling evidence, the boys in the film drove a Jeep and had Rolexes, which were some of the first purchases the Menendez brothers made after the murder. And ironically enough, the film was released by Live Entertainment, of which Jose had been the CEO. Also in the confession, Eric told Oziel that while Lyle wanted to wait to carry out the murders so they'd have more time to plan it, he decided they needed to commit the murders soon, or they would lose their nerve, and mentioned buying shotguns with stolen identification. Oziel also said that Eric confessed that the reason that they killed their mother too was because they couldn't imagine a scenario in which they could kill their father without also killing her. She would be a witness. As deeply unhappy as she would be hopelessly lost without their father, despite the emotional damage he had caused her as well. The year before the murder, Craig and Eric had collaborated on a screenplay about a rich young man who murdered his parents in their home. The judge would not allow the screenplay to be used as evidence during the trial, but it was, however, still a troubling marker of the future crime, as well as the first time Craig had ever heard Eric make this sort of confession. 12 days after the actual murder occurred, Craig would hear a confession that the crime had come to life, which Eric later recanted during Craig's failed attempt to get it on tape. The Supreme Court of the state of California had also ruled that while the tape of Oziel's actual session with the boys was inadmissible, the tapes of their confession that they had killed their parents were admissible as evidence. Because of this, they could no longer plead innocent. About a week before their separate trials began simultaneously, the defense would announce their strategy, that the boys had killed their parents in self-defense, after suffering years of psychological, physical, and sexual abuse under their care. The defense claimed that Eric had been sexually molested by his father for 12 years, between the ages of 6 and 18. They claimed that the most recent molestation had happened just a week before his parents were killed. The defense painted their picture of Jose Menendez as a man who is not known to be kind, and in fact, had many enemies. He was also said to be known to humiliate and threaten people at work, and to have had an overall toxic sense of machismo. In addition, he was known to be a serial adulterer who had had a mistress for 8 years, on top of other girlfriends. Meanwhile, the prosecution, who sought the death penalty, argued that the brothers had killed their parents so they could claim the $14 million estate that was their inheritance. Ultimately, the defense was convincing enough to get a hung jury for both juries, resulting in a deadlocked mistrial. The case attracted a media frenzy and became so high profile that by the second trial, cameras were prohibited. In the second trial, the brothers were prosecuted together with one defense team and a single jury. At this point, it was no longer about whether or not the Menendez brothers committed the crime, but about why they'd done it. The defense leaned in heavily on their argument of sexual abuse, but to no avail. The jurors convicted the brothers of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The Menendez brothers both rejected the death penalty in favor of a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole. For years to come, the brothers would be housed in separate facilities and were only able to communicate through letters to one another. It wouldn't be until 2018 that they'd finally be reunited, when Lyle was transferred to a San Diego prison where Eric had spent the last 5 years. While Lyle was transferred to the prison in February, the brothers didn't see each other until April, when he was transferred into Eric's section, a section that allows inmates to interact. The brothers saw each other for the first time since 1996, and upon their reunion, reportedly came to tears as they shared an embrace. The Menendez brothers are bonded for life, not only by blood, but by the blood on their hands.
This fellow takes advantage of people, he is disloyal, he is contemptful, and he manipulates everyone he runs into.
He lives a double life. He doesn't fit the profile of what we would have expected for the BTK killer.
So all of these incidents, these 10 counts, occurred because you wanted to satisfy a sexual fantasy, is that correct?
Yes.
Between 1974 and 1991, the Wichita, Kansas area was terrorized by a series of 10 murders. The murderer would send taunting letters, drawings, and poems to local police and news outlets describing what he had done. He wanted credit for his deeds, signing his communications BTK, which stood for his particular method of murder: bind, torture, kill.
Do you see any pattern to BTK's conduct?
We have an individual who apparently has the uncontrollable desire to kill at times.
After his last murder in 1991, communications from BTK stopped. That is until a 2004 report in the Wichita Eagle titled "BTK Case Unsolved 30 Years Later" suggested the killer was either dead or in prison.
Most people believe that he was either incarcerated for another crime or killed himself or whatever, because serial killers don't quit killing until they're caught.
Though it had been 13 years since his last murder, BTK apparently needed to let the world know he was, in fact, still very much alive and free. He decided to write again, replying to the article in the Eagle, confessing to a murder he committed in 1986. As proof, he included a copy of the victim's driver's license within the letter. Still not done toying with police, in January 2005, BTK alerted a Wichita news station via postcard to 2 packages he'd left for authorities. Both were cereal boxes, one left by the side of a road and the other behind a Home Depot. Police quickly found the box on the side of the road, which contained graphic descriptions of his first murders. The box behind the Home Depot proved more difficult to locate, but would eventually lead to BTK's downfall. After a thorough search of the Home Depot, the box was nowhere to be found, because it had been accidentally thrown away by an employee. Authorities tracked down the trashed cereal box and found several documents inside. The most important item was a note that began, "Can I communicate with Floppy and not be traced to a computer? Be honest." The document went on, asking police to place a newspaper ad reading, "Rex, it will be okay," if a floppy disk would indeed be untraceable. The police ran the ad, fully intending to trace the disk. Police also examined the Home Depot security footage, coming to believe the cereal box had been left by a man driving a black Jeep Grand Cherokee. 2 weeks after police placed the requested newspaper ad, a package arrived from BTK at a local news station. The package included a floppy disk. The floppy disk contained one file that stated, "This is a test." But it was what BTK didn't mean to include on the floppy disk that changed the course of history. Tracing the disk, police found that it had been used at the Park City Library and Christ Lutheran Church. They were also able to determine that the document was created by someone named Dennis. A quick web search revealed the name of the congregation president at Christ Lutheran Church: Dennis Rader. Officers then scoped out the suspect's driveway and found a black Jeep Grand Cherokee. Further, a DNA sample from a pap smear Rader's daughter had previously was subpoenaed and compared to DNA gathered from one of BTK's murders. The test proved she was the daughter of the man investigators were looking for. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was arrested. Rader tried to act innocent, but it wasn't long before he began confessing in full to the 10 murders he had committed over the years.
When they came out of the house, I came in and confronted the family, and then we went from there. I put a plastic bag over his head, and then some cords, and then tightened it.
His recorded confession lasted approximately 30 hours. As the lead interrogator put it, we couldn't shut him up.
I confronted her, told her there I had a problem, sexual problem, that I would have to tie her up. She was a little upset, and then I reached over, took either feet were tied or not tied. But anyway, I think I had a belt. I took the belt and.
Rader felt particularly betrayed that the police lied about being able to trace the floppy disk. Rader asked the interrogator, "How come you lied to me?" To which the detective replied, "Because I was trying to catch you." With such overwhelming evidence against him, Rader was convicted of all 10 murders. He is currently serving 10 life sentences in Kansas. So if you're looking to get away with murder, don't rely on the police for IT support.